Welcome to ERDC Live. I'm your host, Shelley Tingle with the U.S. Army Engineer Research and Development Center. This is a very special ERDC Live as we are celebrating Engineers Week and the incredible contributions of engineers, especially those here at ERDC. This theme for this year's celebration is Welcome to the Future, which perfectly captures not only the passion and drive for finding tomorrow's solutions today, but also the innovative spirit here at ERDC. From the digital revolution to space exploration, engineers are at the forefront of innovation, solving complex problems and making the impossible possible. ERDC engineers are tackling such challenges as developing new technologies that protect our nation's warfighters and enable force projection in austere environments, mitigating the impacts of a changing climate, discovering ways to create stronger coastlines that are more resilient against ever-strengthening storm systems, developing computational models and algorithms that are unleashing the power of our nation's supercomputing capabilities, and more. Their creativity and expertise and dedication are the foundation from which we are built. Joining us today are three guests, each a leader in their field who will share their insights and perspectives on the future of engineering. We have Ms. Samantha Wiest, a research environmental engineer with ERDC's Environmental Laboratory. In addition, she is the president of the River Cities section of the Society of Women Engineers. Dr. Jessie Doyle and Mr. Dan Harder are both research civil engineers with ERDC's Geotechnical and Structures Laboratory. Jessie is president of the Vicksburg branch of the American Society of Civil Engineers, while Dan is a leader of the Society of American Military Engineers Camp, otherwise known as SAME. So the SAME camp. Great titles, a lot to say. Welcome to ERDC Live.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the first question, we're just going to go around and ask each of you, starting with Samantha. What made you want to become an engineer, and what do you most enjoy about your career?
Yeah, so I definitely didn't want to always be an engineer. I grew up wanting to be a marine biologist, and even went to environmental lawyer, switched off on different stuff, and then only when I started applying to different undergraduate programs is when I started to kind of think about engineering. And I remember my dad would always kind of say, be an engineer, and I think because he said that, I didn't want to be an engineer. But once I started looking into programs and realizing how many different types of engineers are out there and how many different types of professions of engineers you can be involved in, is when I started to get more interested in it. And so I think that I like the idea of an engineer because you're able to actually make an impact and see it through, see the results, and make changes to the world. And so that's kind of why I wanted to be an engineer. And I would say the favorite part of my job is that, being able to hopefully have a positive impact and actually be able to plan things out and execute them and be able to see the results. So.
All right, Jessie, how about you? What made you want to become an engineer, and what do you like most about your career?
Well, as a boy, I always enjoyed, understanding how things worked and building things and stuff like that. Whether it's building a tree house or disassembling an old, thing that I was given or something like that. And then, really, as I, grew up and went through to school, realizing you could do that for a job for your whole life. Wow, this is exciting, right? And so I kind of fell into engineering a little bit. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do at first. Kind of landed in civil engineering. It's kind of being the angle of engineering that most interested me. But and then now in my career, I get to do a lot of those things. I get to build things, see how things work, understand how to improve it or make it better, and continue to do that moving forward. It's always been very exciting. One of the most interesting things about what I do.
So Dan, what made you want to be an engineer?
So I don't think it ever occurred to me that I could do something other than engineering. Growing up, my dad was an engineer, my brother was an engineer, all of our family friends were engineers, and it was never pushed on me. I just thought that's what you did when you grew up. So people ask, what are you going to do when you grow up? And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm going to go be an engineer. Isn't that what people do? I goes I guess they mean civil or mechanical. But I really enjoyed it. I'm glad I went down that path because it's not boring. Every day you're getting to solve different challenges, different problems that come up. Once you fix something, you can move on to something else. You don't have to repeat it. And so I like the the different challenges that every day brings and the different ways you can tackle them with each of those challenges.
So next we'll start with Jesse. As we celebrate Engineers Week, what is the future of engineering, and what advice would you give those students who want to be an engineer of the future?
Thank you, Shelley. I'll start with the future of engineering. In my opinion, at least, the future of engineering is going to be constantly having to develop new strategies to solve a lot of problems. A lot of things that work today or developed to solve problems of yesterday aren't going to be adequate to solve the new problems. They change, they adapt. There's other things we have to design new solutions to, find a new design method or a resource or a way of constructing things and things like that. And so it's constantly moving and changing. And I think talking to people that are farther along in their careers, 20, 30, 40 years down, of the things they learned in school 40 years ago are not what they do today.
That's right.
And similarly to people who are looking to go into engineering today, the things that we're doing today, the things you may learn in school in engineering, are not things you'll be doing in 20 years. They're going to continue to change. The fundamentals are always there, and I think that's very important in terms of engineering education for people that are interested in that. You learn the fundamentals of your field, the way things work, the basic properties of things, but then you have to be willing to learn new things and never just stop. You don't get your degree and then I'm an engineer and I never have to learn anything new. That's not how it works. You constantly have to be learning and adapting, and you do this with other people too. It's not just you and your little box. You have to learn with other people and find new ways to solve different things. I guess to young people I would say, don't be scared of math. People say, oh, if you're good at math, you go into engineering. I'm like, it's important to be comfortable with math, but honestly, software does all the calculations for you in actual practice, right?
Right.
I mean, I don't sit down and do longhand math at my desk. It's helpful to understand the principles behind it, though, the why you do different types of things. That's very important. But don't let math scare people away from it. And a little bit to what Dan works on with the SME camp, I think it's really important that young people try to learn a little bit about what engineering is before you completely commit to the path. There's a lot of camps, even in middle school, high school age, where you can go in for a week in the summer, learn about engineering, what engineers do. There's things like that where there's kind of programs you can start to learn a little bit about it. There's job shadowing, internships, things like that. I feel like in engineering there's a lot of opportunities like that for people that are interested and just want to kind of reach out a little bit, and find ways to kind of understand what the career's about, so you understand what you're getting into, right? You don't want to get all the way through a degree and graduate and say, I don't like this. Nobody wants to do that, right? You need to understand, is this something you're going to enjoy? I feel like in most things, if you enjoy what you're doing, you'll want to keep doing it and enjoy what you're doing with it.
So Dan, how about you? What are your thoughts on the future of engineering, and what advice would you give to students?
Yeah, so I think the future of engineering is closely tied to the past of engineering. It's real easy to get excited about AI and computer learning and new software tools, and it's great that moving forward we're going to have new technologies and new tools and new materials to solve a lot of the problems. But a lot of the challenges we cover, especially as civil engineers, are the same challenges we did 100 years, 1,000 years ago, long ago. We still need roads to move around the country. We still need to protect the coastlines from wave action. We need to be able to work with nature and with rivers and the environment to understand how it's going to impact us. And so while the future of engineering brings all these new capabilities to bear, a lot of the times we can look to the past to understand how they tackle those challenges and now how we can use those new tools to do something similar. And so sometimes I think the best way to prepare for the future is to go read a history book. How did the Romans do this? How did the Greeks do this? How did the Prussians do this? And look at some of those and say, okay, now that we have nanotubes, now that we have GPS, now that we have predictive software, how can we do an even better job? And so I think that's the fun part about the future of engineering, is using those new tools to do a better job of how we solved it before. And I think to the future of engineers, I would say, you want to go into engineering because it's the best. I'm biased, but it's the best field. But at its core, engineering is solving problems, and that exists in every field. And so if you go study engineering, you're prepared for a field in engineering, but you're also prepared for a field in business, and you're prepared for a field in academia, you're prepared for a field in a lot of different areas, because what you're learning to do is take tools, take science, take math, and use that to solve that problem. And that's true in a lot of fields. And so I think engineering is a good base education no matter what you want to do. And like Jesse said, don't be scared of it. There's some challenging things you have to do, but some of that's a rites of passage, and you have to get through it. And there's tools to help you with it now. And if you didn't like that aspect of your education, well, then when you work in a different area that you did enjoy. So don't be scared of engineering is what I would tell people.
I totally agree with that. I would say that I'm also an engineer, as you know. I'm married to an engineer who struggled and took Cal 3. And I'm going to say this because I can. He took it 3 times. But, and so, you know, sometimes you just have to get through it. And he's a very successful engineer, and thank goodness he didn't let Cal 3 stop him from getting that education. So I think that is great advice. So Samantha, what do you see about the future of engineering, and what would you tell students?
Yeah, well, I mean, Jesse and Dan, I think, covered a lot of it. But I would say something that I think I've realized, especially kind of being in my field, is the importance of, like, resiliency. I think, I mean, engineers have obviously been around for hundreds, thousands of years, like, from ancient times. And, you know, like Dan said, we're still using a lot of that, like, those elemental, you know, things that were originated back then. And we just got to keep building and adapting on those things. But also, I think we need to start focusing on building things that last, and structuring ideas that, like, will last for generations to come. You know, like, we're at this point where a lot of dams are kind of like at their point of failing, and you know, different types of bridges, and so I think that, and a lot of that is kind of civil, you know, based, but I think that it's just important to think, you know, we need to start kind of looking into more sustainable options and different types of ideas that we know will, like, last and be, you know, will be appreciated and will be, will be able to be beneficial to, like, many different generations. And so I think that resiliency is, like, a big thing that we should be focusing on as engineers. And to future engineers, and for, like, students who maybe be considering it, the biggest thing I would say is probably just ignore the stereotypes. I mean, they both touch on it a lot, especially as, like, a woman in engineering. I mean, I didn't grow up building things or doing Legos, and I think that was kind of initially why I'm like, oh, I don't want to do that. You know, I never built things. That was not my thing. And then once I realized that you don't need to be building Legos as a 5-year-old to, like, be an engineer as an adult. Right. And so I think that I would just want to encourage, like, younger people, students, young women especially, because I think that I definitely was discouraged growing up, especially, you know, I did okay in math, but I was not good at it. I didn't like it. I like science, and so luckily I was able to find a program and a degree that kind of combined different types of passions, but I was not at all a math whiz. I retook multiple math classes in college, failed a couple, you know, and so, and physics too. So, like, I think that the biggest thing would just be to ignore stereotypes, you know, like, try it out. There's so many different things you can go into. It's not just, like, building things, you know, there's a bunch of different types of engineering to look into.
And so in the intro, I introduced you all because you're all here today because you're representing professional societies. We have the Society of Women Engineers, American Society of Civil Engineers, ASCE, and SAMA, Society of Military Engineering. How do these professional organizations fit into the future of engineering? I'll start with Dan.
This was an unscripted question.
Yes.
So I think the professional engineering societies are really beneficial to the field. Here at ERDC, we're kind of spoiled because we have so many engineers we can collaborate with and work with on a regular basis. But especially, you know, smaller engineering firms and folks that don't have, you know, a bunch of people in the hallway down to them to talk to, it's helpful to bring in engineers from different environments and different fields to work together. What's the state of the field? What are people working on? What are the challenges? How are you accomplishing this? And a lot of these societies are good because it links those folks together, but also from different kinds of fields. You know, we all work for a government research organization, which is the best place to work, but it's very different than what people work at if they're at a private architecture and engineering firm. And it's very different than, you know, people that work for a construction practice. And it's very different than people who work in academia. And so these societies let folks come together and talk about, hey, we all care about, you know, we care about civil engineering, environmental engineering, but we care about this field. We care about concrete. We want to know why it matters. And these guys want to know the components of it. And these guys want to know how to make it cheaper. And these folks want to know how to make it stronger. And these folks want to make it last longer. And so you can pull these people in that have different points of view and kind of discuss those and see, like, oh, that's why we have to balance all these different characteristics in the field.
And so I know that being a member of all three organizations. Each of them kind of bring a different flavor of professionalism to the table, especially for building the future. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of the work ASCE Vicksburg branch is doing?
Sure. So we have typically monthly or bi-monthly meetings where we get groups of people together, just talk about engineering topic. We have lunch. It's somewhat informal, and so to kind of meet people in your field that maybe don't necessarily, like I work down the hall from Dan, but people that don't, other groups, other branches, other firms and things like that, and get to know people on a more informal level. So a lot of times, if you need help with something, you just need to know who to call. Like building those collaborations and having those comfortable relationships with people. You feel comfortable reaching out and talking to somebody of like, oh, I know them because we have lunch together once a month. Okay, it's easy to reach out and talk to somebody and learn about those kinds of things. So it's also about continuing education, learning about what other people do and what their aspects of engineering are and the kind of challenges they're trying to face. But again, it's about those informal, just learning to work as a community of people and building teams and knowing who to talk to is very important. So ASC, we do scholarships for local students going into engineering. We've been involved with, there was recently the E-Week luncheon here. We helped support that. It was sponsored by SWE this year. So we're involved with that as well. And like I said, we also support the Mississippi section, which has a lot of activities as well, and we have section meetings where we have annual meetings throughout the state, and as you go up in the civil engineering ASCE, there's a national type meetings, there's conferences that talk on specific topics, and again, it's about building relationships and understanding the broader part of who do you work with. It's not just the technical side, it's being able to just talk to people and have conversations like this, right? Of people that enjoy the same kinds of things and look at them in different ways. It's a way for us to kind of meet and get together.
So as Samantha, as president of the River City SWE chapter, how do you see SWE fitting into the future of engineering?
Yeah, I think that, they both touched on it again, but I was a part of SWE in college, and I think being a part of it as a professional is very different. And I think especially it's really important in Vicksburg, I think, and with ERDC, because we constantly have new people coming in, which is great. And young people and older people, and I think that being able to bring everybody together into one group and be able to get lunch and be social and get to know each other. I moved to Vicksburg not knowing a single person, but I was able to meet people through SWE, and so I think it's just really important to be able to get past that kind of professional environment and kind of understand that there's another level just besides work, and so I think that with SWE, it's partly about bringing people together, and it's also about giving back to your community. And so I think that by being able to reach this younger generation that will be the next engineers and scientists, I think that we're able to kind of pique their interest, be able to reach out to them and make them realize that this is an option, this is something that they can look into, this is something that they can pursue. And so I think that, and especially younger kids, I think that a lot of people believe that we need to kind of be targeting high schoolers because they're about to go into college. But I think that if I had known at a younger age that being an engineer was an option, I think that maybe I would have gone a little bit of a different route when I was younger. And so, but I think also just being able to have these kids take advantage of a lot of the activities that these professional societies provide in Vicksburg is huge, and the fact that we are able to provide them is great.
So Samantha, what initiatives do you believe are essential for encouraging a more diverse and equitable, inclusive environment to expand engineering and other STEM-related professions? As you said, you had a little bit different experience coming into the engineering field. So how do you see, what initiatives do you believe are essential to that?
I think education is the best thing that you can do. I think, and it's not even in the traditional sense of, that's a huge part of it, being able to teach these things in school, but the fact that we're able to provide a lot of these different opportunities, like the SAME camp, or SWE does a Girl Scout workshop every year where we provide STEM activities. And so I think that the biggest thing is just spreading awareness about the fact that this is something that they can pursue, and you don't need kind of getting rid of these stereotypes like I mentioned, because I think that as a young child it can be pretty discouraging. Oh, well, I didn't do well on a math test, that kind of determines my future or whatever. But also being able to tell them that there are so many different elements of engineering. Like Dan was saying, there's business elements, there's art, there's so many different things that go into this. And so if there's something that a younger kid or even someone in high school maybe they like science, but they also like art. There's a way to combine those two into engineering. So I would say that education is just like, the biggest initiative that a lot of society, like the professional societies and just professionals in general, can try to do to help with the next generation.
Absolutely. So I want to remind our viewers that you are part of this conversation. So if you have a question for Dan or Jesse or Samantha, just put it right there in the comments on YouTube or LinkedIn, and we will get to those momentarily. Jesse, civil engineering is broad research area. How is that area adapting to meet the demands of changing climate with more and unexpected stress placed on our communities, coastlines, and infrastructure?
Well, that's a great question. I guess I'll maybe start with an example. There's something in engineering design. A lot of times you have to worry about like how much is it going to rain, or what are the temperatures going to be, what are the climate and weather patterns that you have to design for. So there's this concept called climate stationarity that goes into a lot of design methods. And what that means is that we are assuming that what we've measured about the weather and the climate in the last few decades is going to represent what's going to happen in the next few decades. And that's kind of a design assumption that's used a lot, but that may not be true. For example, a few years ago after Hurricane Harvey in the Houston area, they had more than 4 feet of rain in a lot of areas there, which when you think about how often is that expected to occur, previous data would suggest, oh, that's maybe once in 1,000 years or something like that. Almost so impossible it'll never happen. You don't even need to worry about it. But it did happen. And a lot of these things we talk about, the way the climate may be changing, these extreme precipitation, lots of rainfall events may happen more frequently. So we need to think about how can we adapt the way we do designs. We need to think about how do we manage risk for different kinds of things. Do we design differently? Do we manage risk in different ways? And things of that nature. There's a lot of other kinds of strategies that can go into like improving the resiliency to different kinds of stressors, climate stressors and things like that. In the water resources like flood management, we talk about gray infrastructure and green infrastructure. Gray infrastructure is like a levee or a dam or some large thing that I've built. Green infrastructure is other kinds of strategies to deal with the same problem. Things like restoring wetlands or building rain gardens or things like that to reduce the amount of rainfall and the intensity of the flood that I have to deal with. And they can work together. So to handle a problem like flood management, you can deal with different types of infrastructure, different types of solutions to all try to deal with a large problem. And that goes to policy and other kinds of things. So it's a very comprehensive kind of way. We have to rethink a lot of the way we've done things and kind of come up with new adaptive strategies.
Very good. I love that. New adaptive strategies. So speaking of new adaptive strategies, Dan, military engineering is a large portion of ERDC's history and current research portfolio. How has military engineering changed in your tenure at ERDC? And how is it evolving to meet today's cybersecurity threats and unconventional warfare?
Ooh, that's a tough question. On a broad scale, I would say military engineering hasn't changed much. We do the same kind of a general method to cross a river, that Xerxes did, 2,500 years ago. But at the same time, there of course is a lot of changes with military engineering. Just like earlier when I was saying we have new tools and new materials and new technologies to tackle old problems in civil engineering, the same is true for military engineering. But how it's changed recently in my time in ERDC, I would say, 8 years ago when I showed up, we were in the middle of the war on terror.
That's right.
And a lot of our military engineering efforts were focused on, counter IED threats, protecting against, indirect fires on the FOBs. How do we protect folks in Iraq and Afghanistan? Now, kind of the focus of military engineering has shifted to peer and near-peer threats. How can we protect large forces on a large scale? And it's similar. How do we get soldiers where they need to be, and how do we protect soldiers from being harmed? But now we're looking at different threats, different obstacles, different scales of operation. And so again, it's tackling those same challenges, but now we have to use the different criteria to evaluate the problem, the different design criteria, and those different technologies to get there. And I think that's really the focus, is taking what we've learned, the last few decades in military engineering and protection and projection, and now just rescoping those to address the current concerns of where we are in that field.
And it has changed. How long have you been at ERDC?
So I've been at ERDC for about 8 years, and before that I spent a number of years in the Army as an engineer officer.
Right. So you've seen a lot of changes throughout your career. And so I want to remind the audience again that if you have any questions for Dan, Jesse, and Samantha, put them right there in the comment section. So Samantha, you earned your ecology engineering degree at Oregon State before coming to Vicksburg. You went all the way from Oregon to Vicksburg, Mississippi, and ERDC. What have you seen changed, and what would you like to see changed in engineering education to meet our nation's mounting engineering challenges?
Yeah, so I mean, I was very fortunate to be able to go to Oregon State and pursue a program like ecological engineering. I actually started out in environmental engineering, and as important as environmental engineers are, and I know that we need them, but I didn't want to be doing water treatment forever, I realized quickly. So I found out that we had the ecological engineering program at Oregon State, and it's one of right now very few that like offer an undergraduate ecological engineering degree. There are some master's programs out there too, but I think it's becoming more and more like a lot more known program, and I think that a lot of schools are integrating it into their schools. But I think that I can't say enough good things about the program at Oregon State. I think that they did a great job of preparing me for the professional workforce, and I think that they provided me with a lot of skills that have been very beneficial with ERDC and would be, with other jobs. And so I think that I would love to see more programs like what they have at Oregon State. I think that the ecological engineering, if that's something that people are interested in, I think it needs to be definitely more well known. I think that, like I said, more schools, I'd love to see more schools integrating it. I think, especially as I've come to ERDC, I didn't realize that there were people like me who kind of had like a passion for like both the environment and engineering and wanted to combine them. And so I think that as I've talked to even professionals here who have been working here for a long time, they said if there was an ecological engineering program when I was in school, that's what I would have done. And so I think that I think, since obviously they were in school, things have changed in the last, 10, 20 years. And so I hope that it kind of keeps changing at that rate. I also hope that there is more programs that are kind of multidisciplinary that integrate different types of engineering, and every time I talk to like an engineer here or somewhere else, there's a different type of engineering that I find out about, and so I think that's great. I think that the fact that there is something for everyone, it seems like, I think is great. So I'd love to kind of keep seeing that, and also just being able to, I guess I'm not in like a elementary level or high school level education, obviously, and I don't know what it's like in the classroom, but I think being able to kind of also expose younger kids and high schoolers, middle schoolers to this type of kind of, obviously not the detailed education, but just kind of being able to expose them to just like the general type of education and like make them aware that, like I said, that this is possible, and not force engineering on them per se, but just kind of let them know that it's out there, right, and it's something that they can pursue if they want to.
So how did you get from Oregon State to ERDC?
Yeah, this is probably the number one question I get with everyone. But I'm originally from Colorado, and then I went to Oregon State for school, and I would say ERDC kind of found me a little bit. Like I have a professor at Oregon State that works closely with ERDC and also with my team lead, Kyle McKay, and so they had reached out to our program because ERDC works with Oregon State quite a bit, and they had said like, hey, we're interested in anybody who like might want to be, pursue like an ecological engineering job with ERDC, and so I graduated during COVID, and so I was applying to anything and everything, freaking out that I might not be employed. And I was like, just sent over a resume, didn't think anything of it. They like interviewed me, basically offered me the job, and I'm like, oh, cool, a job. Oh, like, where is it? Where is the job? And they're like, oh, like Vicksburg, Mississippi, and I'm like, Mississippi? What?
Had you ever been to Mississippi?
Never been to the South before. Closest to the South I've been was Florida, So, but I originally was a contractor, and I'm like, I can do anything for a year,
That's right.
I've been here for almost 3 now, so obviously I love my job, and I never thought that I would be doing something so close to what I wanted to be doing like right out of college. So to be able to have this opportunity is awesome.
That is awesome. Jesse, how has engineering, particularly civil engineering, put a focus on research and designing and building infrastructure components differently in terms of focusing on resiliency and reducing construction's carbon footprint?
Well, that's a great question. Regarding the resiliency bit, I think I touched on that a little bit when I talked about gray and green infrastructure.
Yes.
That's an example of a way to do that. There's a lot of other things that we can do in different types of design and civil engineering, different types of strategies. Regards to covering footprint, that's a very interesting one. We're getting a lot of hot topic. Kind of goes into sustainability. It's tied to resiliency. All these concepts tie together in a lot of ways. In terms of construction specifically, the carbon footprint, the big obvious things that people always want to try to work on that I think are a big factor of this are like improving the amount of recycling and reuse of materials. Reusing lower energy input in materials, things like that. There's a lot of work that's being done in those areas to come up with new materials or to recycle existing materials at higher utilization rates and things like that. Another big thing is trying to electrify construction equipment. There's a lot more of that type of stuff coming out just in the last few years of, if I can use an electric bulldozer or an electric excavator or something like that, or an electric crane, that can reduce a lot of the energy usage there, especially with, more sustainable source of electricity used for that. One of the things that in general I think about it is there's not going to be just one thing that's going to be this is the one thing that'll fix all your problems. I know it's a lot of different strategies, a lot of different ideas that all have to kind of add together to get to where we want to be. So every little bit helps, a little bit here, a little bit there, and at the end of the day, like, oh wow, we can get where we want to go. It requires a lot of different strategies. One of the things I think is a little bit overlooked sometimes, but it can be very important, is making things that we build last longer. So if I build a bridge or a road or a building or whatever type of a structure or piece of infrastructure, if it lasts 50% or twice as long even, that means there's a lot less time I don't have to reconstruct it.
That's
so
right.
I can cut the amount of construction carbon footprint in half.
That's
I only
right.
have to do it half as often. And there's a lot of little things that have to go into doing that, making materials that are more durable, longer lasting, different types of maintenance and repairs and things you can do to make infrastructure we have last longer. So instead of, we're going to tear it down and rebuild it, like, well, can we make it last longer? Can we repair it and adapt it and change it? Sometimes you don't have to just bulldoze it and start over again. That's not always the most efficient way to do it. And so, especially you start thinking about the sustainability side of it, how we reduce our carbon footprint, we have to get a little more creative sometimes than we have in the past. So.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that as civil engineers that they do really well is learning how to adapt and figure out how do we do this differently?
Right.
How can we solve a bigger problem? So Dan, a lot of times, a lot of your work that you do here at ERDC has to do with collaboration. So collaboration with different engineering disciplines and laboratories is crucial for ERDC's success. Throughout your travels and work, where have you seen collaboration with other organizations or countries benefit ERDC and our mission?
So that's a great question, and I think collaboration with different disciplines and different organizations and different nations is really helpful. Sometimes it's easy as an engineer to think, I keep hitting my mic, to think, I'm the smartest. My organization knows everything. We know how to do this, and it's our job to tell everyone how to fix their problems. But there's a lot of engineers in the world who also think that, and it turns out they also have a lot of good ideas. And so it's really nice when you can work with these different organizations, these different types of fields, these different nations, and learn from how they've tackled it. And there's a few approaches to that. One is just it's different people coming up with different ideas. Some of that is they have different problems that they're trying to solve, and so they've had to approach it differently. And now we say, well, that's a different problem, but it's related to this one we have, and maybe we could tailor it here. Some of it has to do with they just have different solutions. They have different histories, different backgrounds, different technologies that culture has grown up with, and so there's a different way of thinking of the problem, and hey, maybe we can tailor those. Some examples is recently I was on a trip in Italy, and I saw how they repaired a bridge in order to increase its capacity. They'd added this external steel reinforcement to it. And I was like, that's really, really interesting. I think that could help solve, kind of a similar problem we're facing in certain environments. And so I was thinking of it from kind of a military engineering perspective and force projection. But I reached out and I talked to the Italian engineer who worked for, the local Department of Transportation. And we kind of talked about, why did you do this? And they said, well, our town doesn't have a lot of money. They had to come up with an inexpensive way to increase the capacity of their bridges, and so they came up with a design. And so from their perspective, it was a good design because it was cheap. From our perspective, it was a good design because it was fast. And so you can kind of take those different solutions that took different criteria and say, oh, maybe we can tailor it for those other uses. And so like while I say we like to think we're the smartest person in the room, that's very dangerous. And so you always want to be willing to listen to other people's ideas, use their ideas, maybe tailor those ideas, and you're never going to get that if you only listen to civil engineers.
That's
if you
right.
only listen to even engineers and not scientists, if you only listen to other government employees, if you only listen to Americans, you want to be able to talk to a lot of different folks, hear all of those ideas, all those solutions, all of those crazy ideas, and then say, okay, what's going to work to make things last longer, to make things work better with the environment. And that's really how you get the best solutions, is by listening to a lot of different folks on projects.
I think that's where we talk about the power of ERDC. The power of ERDC has always been bringing multi-discipline teams to the table, but in addition to that, our collaboration and our ability to collaborate with people from across the world to come up with tomorrow's solutions.
And I think that's one of the strengths we have here at ERDC. If you're a small organization and you're tackling a civil engineering project, well, then you need civil engineers, you need general engineers, you need a couple people that can do a lot of different things. Because at ERDC we've got, what's the news number? We have like 2,500 people, right? We can hire specialists, and so we can pull people in from these different fields. And so whenever we have a project, we don't need, we just need 2 civil engineers to look at this. We no, we need a materials engineer and a structural engineer. We need a mathematician. We need an anthropologist to understand how this is going to impact the town around it. We can pull in, political liaisons to understand how this impacts, the larger structure. You can pull in specialists from all these different fields, and you have, a task force attacking a project. Well, it's an engineering problem, but not every aspect of the solution is engineering. There's many types of things that have to go into there. Costs and business, how it impacts, the culture and the environment. What are the ecological impacts? How is this going to affect all aspects of life? Because especially in civil engineering, we claim the term first, but it has to do with how do we support the civilian world? Like how do we take care of people? And so we can't just say, oh, math and science will solve all of this. We need to be able to pull these different fields and solve all aspects of the project to really create those good solutions.
Very good. So our first question from the audience is for Dan. What is your most surprising discovery while working as an engineer in general, and while working at ERDC more specifically?
Well, if the question is for me, my most interesting discovery about working at ERDC is how amazing it is here. People that know me know I came here kicking and screaming.
That's right.
I came here in the Army. It was my last assignment in the Army, and they said, you're going to Vicksburg, Mississippi. And I had also never set foot in the South. I was like, oh, please, anywhere else but there. And I came to ERDC, and I met the people who are passionate about what they work on and the projects that impact the world and really matter, and the resources and the equipment and the tools we get to use to solve them. And I said, this is the greatest place ever to work. This is amazing. I never want to leave. And so I stayed, and I did. And that was surprising to me, just like, you don't want to assume you're the smartest person in the room. You don't want to assume something about a location or about an organization or a group of people, because, man, there's some great stuff coming out of all sorts of different places. I never knew Vicksburg, Mississippi was the engineer capital of the world. But now here we are, and it's amazing, all these things we got to work on. And I don't ever want to leave this kind of work. This is just amazing here.
I love it. So our next question is for Samantha. How are you using your ecological, I'm going to get that word out, engineering degree in your job at ERDC?
Yeah, that's a good question. Ecological engineering, like I said, is a fairly new concept. It's pretty niche, and so I was shocked at the fact that there was a job out there that fit exactly what I wanted to do and exactly what my program was at school. And so, the whole premise of ecological engineering is being able to combine different components of engineering, including civil and agricultural and environmental and science, ecology, biology, and so. When I was applying for jobs, I was trying to do just anything and everything, civil engineering job. But it's hard because I think that they, from somebody who is hiring someone on, they've never heard of ecological engineering. So they're like, well, that's not really, I don't really know what that is, so I'm just going to kind of sweep it under the rug. But I think that being able to find somewhere like ERDC where, I think the thing I love so much about ERDC is if you don't like what you're doing, odds are like there's going to be something that you like somewhere within ERDC. You know, like
Right.
there's a 99% chance you're going to find something you like. You know, you can switch branches or switch labs, or you know, even like go to one of the other labs like in the other part of the country. And so I think that that's great. But like specifically what I do, how I kind of applied my degree like with what I'm doing here is, I mean, I'm working a lot with ecosystem restoration, which is exactly what I want to be doing. I focus a lot on like riverine systems, but the biggest part of ecological engineering is like combining natural systems and human-made systems to kind of
right.
be able to benefit, you know, both nature and humans. And so I think that that's what's so cool is like we want, instead of working against nature, I think we need to start working with nature a little bit more, especially with like climate change and everything. And so being able to like integrate nature-based systems and solutions and just being able to like integrate green infrastructure with gray infrastructure. And so that's kind of a lot of what I do is ecosystem restoration. I do a lot of kind of like using my knowledge of ecology into engineering. And so, you know, I think that that's what's so cool about having a multidisciplinary degree is like, it makes it hard sometimes because you don't know everything about one thing, you know, kind of a lot of things about many things. And so you're able to kind of bring in different components into basically being able to have a bigger understanding of systems. So
Very good. And so we're going to go to Jesse for the next question. How are you using your background in civil engineering? What exactly do you do? So explain to them.
okay.
Apparently
What do I
the
do?
audience doesn't know the type of research you do.
Okay, so I work here in our geotechnical and structures laboratory, and I work specifically in the airfields and pavements group, which works with building pavements and runways and things like that for trucks and aircraft planes and stuff like that, which relates very closely to the civil engineering work that I did. That's kind of a traditional, you know, avenue in civil engineering, and I did graduate work in kind of that area, which is sort of how I got introduced to ERDC in the first place. Actually, my professor, you know, was involved here somewhat, and so I got to come work here for a couple weeks while I was still in school. Like, oh, this is kind of interesting, and and you know, and kind of ended up here. But I kind of use a lot of the principles every day, but also I do a lot of things that I never did in school. In terms of like I work with, you know, material scientists, chemists, ecological people, all these other kinds of things that I've got to explore that are outside of civil engineering, but at the same time they relate. You know, I've talked about
right.
systems and all these other kinds of things. Like all these other systems relate. Like it's not just, okay, I went to school in civil engineering and you learn all the typical civil engineering things. But there's so many things outside of that that, you know, you keep an open mind, you start to learn all these new things like, oh, wow, I never realized, you know, and sometimes just learning some little bit of chemistry or something like that. I'm not a chemist, but I talk to chemists and I can at least understand a little bit what they're talking about and how does that relate to what I'm doing. So, I mean, what I do is definitely very much civil engineering, but it branches out in so many different ways and has so many little touch points with other avenues that's what keeps me interested for sure. Of I'm not just doing civil engineering. Yes, you know, it says civil engineer on my, you know, on my door, but I do a lot of other things too, which is what's interesting to me too. So I'm not just a civil engineer.
That's right.
I get to be a problem solver, as Dan was saying, and as Samantha was saying, like, that's what we really do. We solve problems.
That's right.
You know, we call ourselves engineers and other kinds of terms and all that. Just what variety of problems were you trained up to solve, but you try to solve all kinds of problems afterwards.
That's
you know,
right.
a little bit broader than that. So.
Yeah, all the critical thinking skills that we've
absolutely.
learned
Yeah.
in engineering school pay off in different scenarios. So this question is for the two seasoned engineers, so I'm assuming that's you two guys.
We're seasoned now. Okay.
You're seasoned.
Nice way to put it.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So since engineering is an ever-changing field, how do you stay up to date on state-of-the-art,
You want to go
on
first?
the
or-
latest and greatest?
I think there's a lot of ways to stay engaged and stay up to date. Part of it was like we talked about earlier with the professional societies and staying involved with other people in the field so that
Absolutely.
you don't forget what's going on, you know, in industry. Part of it is staying involved, you know, through conferences and reading, you know, the technical papers and the journal articles that are coming out so you know what's going on. And then part of that is kind of the theme of collaboration and working with other folks. You know, it'd be really easy for our hallway to say, well, everyone in this hallway, this is how we do it, this must be the best way. But if you're not getting out there and talking to other organizations, other fields, other nations, other groups, you're not going to know what's happening. And so I think just getting out there and talking to those different groups, staying involved with the professional societies, staying up to date on your reading, and then of course, you know, a good opportunity is to go back to school whenever you can. ERDC's got great programs to constantly send people to go get another degree. I'm sure if you wanted a second doctorate, you probably could.
Yeah,
But, Erdic's always willing to send people to school, and I think that's important. There's not a substitution for doing hard work and learning things. And there's a lot of ways to learn, but you do have to be proactive to stay up to date on things.
So Jesse, do you have anything to add to that on how to stay up to date in an ever-changing profession?
I mean, I think Dan covered all the general things I was thinking as well, like, conferences and other kind of technical ways to talk to people. But even sometimes it's just in terms of, like, Erdic's a big place. Like, say we had 2,000 some odd people or whatever. It's like just walking down hallways and learning about what people in other groups do, or getting opportunities to go work on other projects and say, well, understanding what they do, and then you can kind of again bring that back to what you work on and kind of get new, fresh ideas, right? Like, it's not just what's in the textbook. Like all these new things you have to come up with, and to come up with new things, they need to talk to new people. The big term is multidisciplinary, which is very true, but I'm like, it just means working with other people on, kind of cross-pollinating or getting different ideas and bringing them together. And so to me, it's just kind of this constant, work in progress kind of thing. There's no one thing of like, oh, I go to my one class a year. That's not really it. It's just it's a constant, openness to new ideas and to new concepts and talking to new people and collaborating in different ways. So.
I love that, because it's not just one thing.
No,
it's
not at all.
things that you have to implement as a professional engineer. Constantly. So the next question is for Samantha. What have you experienced Erdic's role to be in the world of engineering? In other words, what is Erdic's engineering impact? And in your ideal world, what will it be moving forward in the next 10 to 20 years? So that's a lot of questions. We're going to break that. We're going to break that down into question number one. What is Erdic's engineering impact? What engineering impact do you see in your job?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I'm happy to answer this question. I might not be the best. I mean, I haven't been at Erdic that long, so like it's hard for me to kind of see the impacts, I guess, firsthand. But I guess like within my job, I mean, I'm a part of a really great team, and so we are constantly kind of like releasing tools and different types of research and information. And so I think that I haven't been on the other side, I guess, of like actually seeing them in use, but I think that just being able to see like my teammates' names on these documents and like journal papers and everything, and like even like I know that when I was in school, like it was kind of cool because I remember I used a tool that was developed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and it said like Kyle McKay on it. And then I graduated and I started working for him. And I'm like, wait, like I know you. Like your name was on this tool that we use. And so, I think that the fact that like what people are doing here is like truly reaching the outside world. And I mean, there's just so many different impacts, like with the military and like I think just obviously the different branches. And so it's hard for me to kind of like break down, I guess, the total amount of impacts that I see from Erdic as a whole, but within my team and like within my job, it's really cool to be able to see like like a tool that we've been working on or I've been working on, and then finally get it out there, and to know that like this actually will be useful to someone, and like whether it's a district or a private company, like they're actually going to be able to put this tool to use, for environmental planning and be able to get some like results. So I guess like that's the extent of like what I've seen with personally Erdic's impact, but. It's huge, like it's never ending.
And so the next question is also for you. It says, Samantha, you talked about your path to Erdic. Were you surprised at Erdic's diverse community of engineering disciplines?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I was shocked. I mean, I think that I never knew that a place like Erdic existed. I knew that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers existed. I mean, we look at their tools in school and we read about them and everything, but I didn't know that, first of all, that there was a research side of engineering. I didn't know what that entailed. And so I think that once I moved here and realized that Erdic existed and there was like such a like diverse group of people, engineers, scientists, I was shocked. Like, and it's, I'm not going to say this because obviously I don't know, but I feel like there's probably not anywhere else like Erdic out there. And so I think that it's really cool that like I'm a part of it, and the fact that I'm exposed to it, I mean, I think that there's definitely like there's some stereotypes about the South and, maybe about Vicksburg and just kind of like, oh, well, it's this way, or you don't want to go there because of this. And then once you come here and like be part of the community and be, Erdic is its own community also. And so I think that once you're a part of it, you kind of get a whole new perspective on what it is and what you can do here. So.
I agree. So I think the first question I would also like to hear from Dan and Jesse. What do you see? How do you see ERDC looking and its impact 10 to 20 years from now going forward? How do you see that? I'll start with Dan.
Well, so oftentimes I go and I kind of give talks about ERDC to different groups and let
Yes.
people know what we do. And one of the things I like to say when I talk about what ERDC is and what we do and how we're different than other labs, it's the Engineer Research and Development Center. But we're not engineers doing research and development. We're doing research and development on the field of engineering. We're not just trying to make a new thing. We're trying to expand the knowledge that engineers have to go solve those problems. And I think the easiest way to point to this is kind of how you alluded to it. But go pull out your textbooks, your engineering textbooks, and go look through them and see where that core knowledge comes from. Sheet flow comes out of the Waterways Experiment Station. A lot of work on geotechnical engineering and slope stability came out of the Waterways Experiment Station. There's just a lot of this knowledge that's done on such a large scale that we pass it out there, and it's not, oh, come buy our product, come look at our thing. It's helping the nation and the world be better engineers overall. And I think that's really over the next 20 years of ERDC where we're going to impact things. It's not by making the newest widget to solve this one problem.
That's right.
It's by coming up with that new way of thinking, that new way of understanding problems, that new base knowledge that we can go teach to all the engineers to go use to make a lot of widgets to solve a lot of problems. And I think that's really where we're going to have that biggest impact going forward.
I like that answer. Jesse, do you have anything to add to that?
Can you refresh me on the question?
So, where do you see ERDC in the next 10 to 20 years? How do you see our field of engineering changing?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, ERDC, again, is a R&D that works on engineering, so we're trying to always advance that knowledge. And I think looking back a little bit, like you talked about textbooks, like things I learned in school, and then where I work now, I'm like, there's an old dusty report somewhere written by the guy whose stuff now is they've passed on, retired, and so on. But the stuff that those influences go out into the future, and I hope that that'll continue, right? Of like the things we're doing today that are kind of at the research stage, we're trying to understand how to implement them and develop the tools, whether it's a software or a code or a product or a process or whatever it is, of like hopefully those things start to get wider use. Like, hey, maybe somebody else thinks that's a good idea too. Like you were talking about before, of a lot of engineers want to think, oh, I've got all the best ideas. I'm like, no, we don't.
No, we don't.
No. I mean, it's important to be confident in what you do know, but it's very, very important to be humble about all the things you don't know.
That's right.
There's so many things. Like I like to think of like, I feel like I know less 10 or 15 years into my career than I did when I started.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways,
Yeah.
and so like trying to always be open to those new ideas and then kind of help, promote those and say the best ideas will hopefully win. Like in some of it's maybe ERDC, some of it's other places, but hopefully it can have an influence on that. Again, you can see that in the past. You look back a little bit, the history theme you talked about earlier of look at your textbooks, look at the processes, the standard design softwares and stuff like that. And a lot of times there's a little red Corps of Engineers castle in the corner there, or a name of somebody that worked here and did things that that are important that are still used today, right? So not everything will. Some things you design or research, sometimes they don't work. Like, okay, well, we'll go back to the drawing board, try something else, or maybe somebody else came up with a better idea. But enough ideas, definitely a lot of them start to float up, and then they stay, and you can see those long-term impacts. So I think 10, 20 years from now, you continue to see that. I feel like, or I hope. Who knows? Maybe something one of you got. Samantha, who knows? In 20 years, Samantha's name will be in the textbook.
That's right. It'll be someone else sitting at Oregon State saying, hey.
Look at this. Yeah, absolutely.
I see your name on this stool. So, Jesse, how can civil engineers contribute to sustainable urban environments?
Oh, okay. So back on sustainable infrastructure idea. So there's a lot of ways that you can. I remember going to a meeting in ASCE a number of years ago. We were talking about green built environments and green transportation infrastructure and things like that. And again, talking about all the different ways of, instead of just building sidewalks and roads and so on, of like, how does that impact the community? How do the users interact with that? How do I put in more trees? That both reduce the heat from the infrastructure, provides a green space, can help reduce the runoff. All these other kinds of techniques that we can apply, and having a broader view of things. Like it was the group or the meeting I went to was, there were civil engineers there, but there are all these other sociologists, there's other kinds of people, a lot of different backgrounds, and all trying to think about how do we think about these big systems to solve human problems. right? And think about all the different aspects of that. And don't forget the idea that like our impact on the environment is very important. We need to make sure that the things we do as humans to improve our lives are not damaging something else or causing other unintended consequences sometimes, and trying to think about those second and third order, how is this going to affect everybody else? You know, whether it's other people in my city or the, you know, the animals and the environment and so on, of like, and how can you kind of encourage all those things? They had this idea of the triple bottom line. I want to improve the, you know, the sustainability, the economy, and the, you know, the human side of things as well, the social side of things, like all these different parts of it, and they all work together in a lot of ways.
So as we wrap up, is there anything any of you would like to add to our E-Week conversation as we wrap up? Do you have any final thoughts that you would like to share with the audience?
Well, in honor of E-Week, I just want to give the kind of the pitch. We talked about the Society of American Military Engineers, but every summer we host an engineering and construction camp here in Vicksburg. And it's the deep fight for recruitment, right? We pull high school kids from all over the country, and they come here to Vicksburg for a week. The National Guard hosts them, and they get to see ERDC and the district. They go out on the river. They see the Nissan plant, energy, just all facets of engineering to kind of get them excited about it. It's a great event. If you have high school age kids, go sign them up for it. But really, the reason that camp is successful is because engineers are passionate about their field and they want to give.
Right.
And we're always looking for people who want to support not just the SAME camp, but the GEMS camps and all these other STEM outreach programs. But if you have a passion for your field, where am I looking? This one. If you have a passion for your field and you want to help at STEM outreach, reach out to either Shelley or to myself or to a lot of people. There's a lot of these things, and find a way to get involved. Oftentimes, we don't necessarily need people to come talk about why their job is great. We need selfless servants who are willing to come, you know, cook breakfast in the morning and to help the kids, you know, move their stuff from one place to the other to organize the events. But we're always looking for volunteers who are willing to help out with these STEM outreach camps and events. So
Jesse, any final thoughts as we conclude E-Week?
We've covered everything. Engineering is awesome. Everybody should be an engineer. You know, it's not just for the stereotypical engineers. There's something there for everybody, right?
There is.
You know,
There's
it's learning about solving problems and finding interesting things, and you know, stay curious about stuff, right? You know, a lot of things we have to do of like. The biggest problems require that the humans working on it have a bigger imagination than the problem.
That's right.
So the bigger the problem, you need more people, more imagination, more aspects of it, and put it all together. You know, so like you gotta outthink your problems, right? You can think bigger things, and you can solve your problems. So.
Absolutely, I love that. Stay curious.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, Samantha, any final thoughts as we wrap up E-Week?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, you know, I think the E-Week is great. I think it's great that we celebrate engineers. I remember being a part of it in college, and you know, it's great. But I also want to emphasize that engineers cannot do what they do without every other, like, so many other different types of professions: scientists, social science, like, you know, business people, like artists. Like, I think that we cannot be engineers without everybody else, and so I think that. Just kind of extending that appreciation, you know, because even though it's the Society of Women Engineers, we include everyone. Like I mean, even if you're not in STEM, like I would say that if you want to be a part of it and support women in engineering, like even if you're a man, you can be a part of it. We don't have any male members right now, but if you want to, you're welcome.
Honorary, baby, you can.
But you know, I just kind of want to extend that appreciation and just say that, like, I love being an engineer, and I love what I do, and I love being a part of the community, you know, especially like the ERDC community. I don't know if there's any other place where I get to work with so many different types of people for different types of projects. And if there's something out there that like I want to do, I believe I can do it here.
That's right.
And so, yeah, I guess just kind of saying that, and also kind of going off what Dan said, like, I think I've realized how important STEM outreach is. And Vicksburg does a great job of it because of these professional societies. So I would say if there's anybody out there that's not in Vicksburg, and people who are in Vicksburg, you know, we need help with that. Like, I think that it's huge to reach out to this next generation of engineers, because like they are our future. So
absolutely,
you know, keep promoting STEM, keep being involved in STEM outreach, and yeah, so.
Very good. And so I'm going to wrap today's ERDC Live up. And if you have any questions that were not answered for Dan, Samantha, or Jesse, you can email us at erdcinfo@usace.army.mil, erdcinfo@usace.army.mil if you have any questions additional questions that we did not cover, or if you're watching this after we've gone out of production, after we're no longer live, if you're watching the replay of it, and if you have questions, we will be happy to field those to our guests today. So thank you so much to our audience, and thank you to my awesome guest today.
Yeah,
I
thank you,
love
Michelle.
E-Week. It's one of my favorite things that we celebrate here at ERDC. And thank you to our live audience. Until next time, find your joy. Thank you so much.